Chapter 10, Part 2. Jim spent the morning jolting from side to side on the cart, jumping down from time to help Betsy heave the horse over sticky heaps of snow. "There's my yard," Betsy grunted, "and there's my cows. Hear them talking to each other? Like old men in an alehouse they are, full of wind and wisdom. Now, this is where my round finishes, but if Albert will let you, we'll carry on to the river." Jim jumped down again, and they both hauled on Albert's reins until they'd coaxed him past Betsy's yard and the mumbling of the cows. "Let's smell your bread, Jim," Betsy said. He'd already nibbled the end of it and was keen to save the rest for his next few meals. Betsy reached out and took a huge bite, her loose teeth bending forwards as she chewed. "Poor old Rosie Trilling," she kept sighing in her breathy voice. "Poor old Rosie." They were coming near the river. Jim could smell it, and he could hear the gulls keening across it. The street they were in now was littered with heads and spines of fish, and women sat on crates gossiping as they worked at their filleting. Their hands were slimy and red with fish entrails. Cats and children prowled around them. A dairy woman with her pails slung across her shoulders trudged past them and shouted out something at Betsy. Betsy clicked at Albert to stop. "She'll be gutting me," she grunted, "if she thinks I'm selling milk on her patch. Hop down, Jimmy, and ask someone where Rosie Trilling lives. Someone'll know her." Jim slid down from the cart and watched lame Betsy coaxing the horse round and limping back along the street. "I could stay with her," he thought, "if I don't find Rosie. I could milk her cows for her and carry her pails. Surely she'd give me a home." He started after her. "Betsy," he called, but she didn't hear him. She and the younger dairywomen were shouting at each other across the street, while the knock-kneed horse nosed into the muddy road and snorted at the fish heads. Jim ran down the side street. The houses backed onto the river and had boats in their yards, spars and masts rocking gently, tinkling in the early breeze. Men were edging barges out, shouting across to each other, their voices bouncing off the buildings and echoing over the water. Some women were standing, hands on hips, watching them. Jim couldn't remember what Rosie looked like anymore. In his mind, he saw a big woman with floury hands and her hair neat under a white cap and a starched apron tied over her long black dress. There was no one here like that. The women he saw had drab shawls draped across their shoulders and wore coarse dresses with ragged hems. He listened to their voices, trying to pick out one that he recognised, but they all sounded the same, pitched to shriek against the bustling noises of barges on the move and the screaming of the gulls. At last he plucked up the courage to ask someone where Rosie Trilling lived. "If she's in," he was told, "she's at the White Cottage at the bottom end." When he knocked at the door, a woman's voice shouted for him to come in, and he knew it was Rosie. And there she was, crouching over a brazier that was glowing with hot coals, coaxing flames out of it. She was holding a twisted wire with a glistening herring skewered onto it. An old woman, wrapped in bundles of brown and grey shawls, huddled next to her, in a chair that seemed to be made out of boxes roped together. Rosie was breaking bits off the herring and feeding the old woman it. She looked up at Jim, surprised. "The men have set off, son," she told him. "Rosie," said Jim. His eyes stung from the smoke. He rubbed them with the backs of his hands. "Yes, I'm Rosie," she said, "and I told you." "I've come about Lizzie and Emily," he said. The smoke seemed to be in his throat now, twisting down inside of him. It was hard for him to breathe. "I'm Jim Jarvis." "Lord bless us!" Rosie dropped the herring into the flames, where it spurted like a blue light. The old woman swore at her. "Annie's little boy." Rosie stared at him, her hand to her mouth. Jim nodded. He bit the back of his hand to try to make the stinging in his eyes go away. He could hardly see Rosie. Now she was a brown blade shape that was moving around the brazier and coming towards him. She smelt of warmth and fish. She squatted down to his level, putting her hands on his shoulders. Ma died a long time ago, Jim began. Rosie pressed him to her and ran her hands through his hair, hugging him as if he was a tiny child again. And for the very first time since Joseph had told him the terrible news, Jim let out all the hurt that had been locked up inside of him, and he cried for his mother.